Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good night, whatever time you are listening to this podcast, this episode, part 3 of Divorcing Jesus and Finding a Peace that Surpasses All Understanding. I am glad to be here this evening, giving honor, praise, and reverence to the divine, masculine, and feminine energy, to the divine beloved ancestors, those elevated, uplifted ancestors, to my ancestors of Mali, Africa, the Tuareg Nation, to my ancestors of Guinea-Bissau, the Balanta Nation, to my bloodline ancestors, to my spiritual ancestors. I give thanks and honor for your presence tonight. I am here in the 757, and it has been raining all day long today. It started yesterday afternoon, and all day long it's just been not heavy, hard rain, but a steady rain all day. We had the Umoja Festival this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Today, I don't know if they did anything today because they were supposed to have gospel choirs and the like out today, but with the weather, I don't know if that happened or not. I got a chance to present yesterday. I had 2 presentations at the Portsmouth Cultural Arts Community Center, and I got to present Queen Mother Coretta Scott King and tell her story to 2 groups on yesterday. And it was amazing. It really was. I love telling the story of Coretta and Martin because, of course, there are details of their lives that people don't know. And so I always go in a little deeper than the surface stuff that people know about Dr. King and Coretta. And so that was pretty good. What else? I started 2 jobs in this past week, and it's crazy because one was it's a full-time job, and I started a part-time job in the evening, and I only took the part-time one because it was taking the full-time one forever to get back with me, so I had to take something in the interim. And I need to do some shadow work because I'm constantly having to take jobs in the interim of me doing my storytelling, my historical interpretations. During the school year, I have enough work that's all I need to do. But when school lets out and the summer times come, I have to always try to find something else to fill in the space. And I guess that's cool, but I want to figure out why I keep coming back to having to do this when I should be able to do the historical work that I do all year round. I have friends that have been storytellers and historical interpreters. That's their job. That's their main job, and they don't have to go to corporate plantations to work in the interim. So I'm trying to do some shadow work to figure out why I keep coming back to this and what steps do I need to take to ensure that I don't have to, especially with the jobs that I have. The part-time job I worked at for 4 nights and I couldn't take any more. The full-time job, I'm going to have to hold on to that for a minute to see how that pans out. But it's at a resort, and a timeshare resort. And if you live in the Hampton Roads area, you know that all of the timeshare resorts here are former plantations, or that their names used to be plantation this or plantation that. So I am trying to figure out, how to get off of that plantation, because my spirit was vexed this week. Oh, I'm burning some oil, and it's some amber oil, and it's some mfefo, which is ancestral incense. And it's strong. It is very, very strong. And it just really got strong as soon as I started this podcast and was giving reverence to the ancestors. It really, really got strong. And the smoke is really, really going here. But, but the resorts are plantations. And so my spirit was vexed being in those places and knowing that they are plantations and they operate still the way plantations do. You see Black people doing the grunt work, and you see white people doing the fun stuff on the corporate plantation. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I ain't happy right now. I'm really not happy that I have to do this, but it's my own fault. It's nobody's fault but mine, because I didn't plan. I didn't try to schedule performances and presentations. I relied on the companies that I work for to do that for me. But as an independent artist, I realized I'm going to have to take the reins myself and to go ahead and do this thing. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to have to go ahead and do it for real. So again, this is part 3 to Divorcing Jesus and Finding a Peace that Surpasses All Understandings. And I think the last episode I had the church that I was going to that were my friends were the pastors of it. It had closed down because he had stepped outside of the marriage. And so once again, I'm left out in limbo with no church. My dad's gone. I'm divorced. So I'm still kind of out there. It's feeling like, to me, uncovered. Even though in hindsight, I was always covered. But in that time where my mindset was still being colonized, I felt uncovered. Ooh, that smoke is really, really going. I think that candle's getting ready to burn out soon. Okay, I'm sorry. But the ancestors are really talking to me through the smoke that is really, really going right now. So I'm uncovered. So I'm out there again, and I'm trying to find a church home, one that I can get closer to God, get closer to Jesus, get closer to something that will uplift my spirit. So I'm bouncing around. I'm visiting different churches, and every time I would go to a church, the drama, just on the first day, the drama was just, I couldn't take it. I remember visiting one church, and it was a huge church in the Virginia area. And the pastor walked in, and I didn't know it was the pastor, and everybody in the church just stood up and were clapping their hands. And I thought maybe Jesus had walked in. I'm trying to figure out what is going on. And it was just the pastor walking in. I said, okay, so this one worships the pastor. It's going to be a no. I sat through the sermon, and I think there were 3 offerings taken up in one sermon. So I was like, no, this is not going to be one of them. I visited I thought, well, maybe I'll visit small churches. So I went to a smaller church, and the first thing the pastor said was he had gone to a conference, and all the other pastors and bishops had their own private plane, and that he needed to have his, and wanted to take up collection to get his own private plane. And I thought to myself, well, you only got like 50 members. I don't know how in the hell you're going to raise enough money to buy a private plane. I know Jesse Duplantis said the same thing, and Creflo Dollar said the same thing, and they had a whole lot of members of their church, and they didn't get the plane. So I don't know how you can get a bruh with 50 members. But that was that. I visited a church. I'm serious. I was just trying to find a church. I visited a church where the pastor of the church, on I think the week after I visited the church, the pastor of the church, that following Sunday, he brought his mistress to the church. She was sitting on the front row. His wife was sitting on the front row on the other side, and he introduced his mistress to the church in front of his wife. So apparently he had gone down to the Caribbean and hooked up with this young woman, brought her back to the States, put her in a place up in New York, and then finally decided to bring her back to the Virginia area and introduced her to the congregation in front of his wife, as she was going to be their new first lady. And the crazy thing is, only half of the church got up and left. The other half stayed and was like, okay, cool. Welcome, First Lady. How you living? How you doing? I visited a church where the pastor is crazy, because I had visited this church before. And then when I went back, it was for the pastor's anniversary. And the pastor of my old church, my first church that I went to, the mega church, he was preaching for their pastor's anniversary because they were really good friends. And so he preached the word. And it was good to see some old friends there. But the week after the pastor's anniversary, same said pastor of that church was caught in the park in drag soliciting men. And they put his picture in the paper, and he is in full makeup. And it was funny because my old pastor, when he got up to preach, he said it was such a great honor because the man he was honoring was such a great, great man, and he was proud to call him friend. And I was like, do you know that this fool dresses up in drag on the weekends and go in the park and solicit men? And the crazy thing is, when they put the picture of him in the newspaper, he looked like Ving Rhames in Holiday Heart. Swear to God, he looked like Ving Rhames. And his wife was a cosmetologist. She had a booth in the mall where you could go in and get your face beat. She had such a precision and a precise way of doing your eyebrows. She could do your eyebrows and it would change your entire look. So it was clear that the wife did not know, because she would have never let her husband go out there looking like Ving Rhames in Holiday Heart. She could have beat his face to death. But yeah, so those were the churches that I was visiting and just out there, just uncovered. And I stayed friends with one of the members from the church, the last church that I was a member of. I stayed friends with one of the ladies. She was so cool. She was a bishop. And I had never seen a bishop as cool as this woman was. Beautiful black queen. And she was just so cool. She would, she always wore her collar as the bishop, but she would have on jeans or whatever. Just cool. We would hang out sometimes after church. We'd drive down to the beach and hang out. We'd go out to dinner or whatever. Just absolutely cool. And I thought I had found a new friend that I could just hang out with, that was going to really help teach the word of God to me and kind of be a mentor. We was around about the same age. And I was like, she a bishop, so she know the word of God and she can detect foolishness and blah, blah, blah. So I was really, happy to be her friend. And then one day she called me and she said, I have a question for you and I don't want to ask you over the phone. So could we meet for coffee or tea or whatever, or dessert, just meet. And it was an evening. And I said, sure. So she picked a little place. It was like a little cafe. And we get there and we're having dessert and we're chopping it up about absolutely nothing. So then she says, well, I wanted to talk to you because God told me to ask you. And I was like, oh, Lord, here we go. God ain't told you nothing, but go ahead. God told me to ask you if me and my son could move in with you. Now, I had a huge townhouse. It was a 3-story townhouse. And I bought that townhouse because I was stupid and dumb in a relationship that did absolutely nothing for me. And that's a story for another day. And I probably will do a podcast on that as well, because I'm not going to tell everybody else's dirt and not tell mine. And I got a whole graveyard full of dirt on me. But that's not what this episode is about. So she asked me if she could, and her son, who was a teenager, could move in with me. Now, from what I understand, she was living with her mother and her father, and there was some drama there. But I'm like, no, because number one, she's a bishop. I'm still a secular Christian. I'm a Christian, but I'm a secular Christian. So I don't play gospel music all day long and all night long. And I have friends. I have a friend, and sometimes they come in at night and they don't leave till morning, and so no, I'm not going to change my entire life for you and your son, especially if you already have somewhere to live. Now, if she had been homeless and had absolutely nowhere to live, that's a different story. But she was asking to come and live with me and with her teenage son with me, and I couldn't do it. And I told her, I said, I hope this doesn't tarnish our friendship. I said, but I think that if you were to move in, that would tarnish our friendship. We would have ended up being enemies or not being friends or not speaking to each other completely. And I didn't want that, but I told her no. And she was like, no, this would not tarnish our friendship at all. She said, I love you and I respect that you told me no. She said, we're not in dire straits. We have somewhere it's just uncomfortable right now, but we'll keep looking. But you and I, we're fine. We're cool. Excuse me. So I said, okay. So weeks go on and we're still communicating with each other. We talk on the phone, text, hadn't gone out anywhere. So I had started going to a church not too far from where I lived, and they were meeting out of a school. And it was a cool church. The pastor was a little younger than me, but the crowd, the people, they were young, and they were young at heart, and the choir was cool, and excuse me, it really, really was a pretty good church. So I said, okay, well, maybe I found a home. So the church was having a white party, and it was on a Saturday night, and they were having an all-white party. And so I called my friend, the bishop, and I was like, hey, the church that I've been going to for a few weeks are having a white party. Do you want to go? So she was like, oh, my God, yeah, that would be really, really cool. Yeah, let's go. So we made plans to go to this all-white party. It was on a Saturday evening, and we talked that Saturday afternoon. She called me from she was getting her a pedicure and a manicure. She said, yeah, I've already picked out my outfit, and I can't wait. And she was going to come and pick me up. We were going to go to this party. So the party started at 8 o'clock, and she was going to be there at 7:30 to pick me up. No, the party started at 7. She was going to be there at 6:30 to pick me up. 6:30, no bishop. 7 o'clock, no bishop. 7:15, now I'm starting to get worried because I haven't heard from her. So I start to call her, calling around and checking to see if she was okay, because I was starting to get really, really, worried about her. 7:30, no bishop. 7:45, I'm calling, no bishop. If you hear noise in the background, it's because I'm trying to put out this smoke of this oil that I'm burning, because it is really, really burning. It's getting in my throat. 7:15, 7:30, no bishop. 7:45, no bishop. She's not answering my phone. Now I'm really getting worried. So my niece calls me and she's like, I'm calling you before you head out to the party. And I said, well, I don't think I'm going, because the bishop that was supposed to pick me up, she's not here and she's not answering her phone. So my niece was like, do you still want to go to the party? And I was like, yeah, I do. She said, well, I'll go with you. I said, cool. So she got dressed and she came and picked me up and we went to the party. Sunday morning, I'm still calling her because I'm really worried at this point. She's not picking up her phone. I get dressed to go to church, and the church is only like a mile, maybe 2 miles from where I lived. And there's a stoplight right in front of the church, so you would have to turn left in the left turning lane to go into the church, to the school, to get to the church. And I'm sitting here at the light, and I look over to my right, and whose car is beside me at the light? Y'all, I could make this stuff up if I wanted to. The bishop. And I'm trying to get her attention. I'm waving and honking my horn. And when I tell you, she almost turned around backwards in her seat, and she was driving. I was like, she knows it's me, and she refuses to look. I said, okay. So I go in the church, stay for the sermon. After church, try to call her again. No answer. So the next day, I emailed her. And I said to her, and I was like, I don't know what happened. I don't know why you playing ghost, but that became her nickname. I don't know why you're playing ghost, but yeah, don't worry about calling me, because I don't know. This friendship is done. It's a done deal. And I never heard from her again. Never heard from her again. So the pastor of the old church where we went together, her and I were still friends. Even though the church had dissolved and she actually had moved out of town, her and I were still friends. We still talked, and I was helping her with a business that she had started, and I was basically a midwife for her. I helped her birth her business, and I was still going to this newfound church because it was okay. It was all right. I was enjoying myself, and I thought I was really finding Jesus. But then I started noticing some things at this church that I had noticed from all of the other churches. The pastor was married. He had, him and his wife had 2 children, a girl and a boy. And I would notice that his wife was always overly supportive. And when I say that, I mean, he would crack jokes, but he wasn't that damn funny. And whenever he would crack these jokes, she would laugh like uncontrollably. And I was like, are you laughing because if you don't, when you get home, it's going to be on? It was weird. And I knew that they had this weird dynamic of him being the man of the house and the man of the church. When she used to sing in the choir, and ever so often she would lead a song, and she had an amazing voice. She sang so beautifully. And I remember it was the year that Yolanda Adams' song "Open My Heart" came out. And I requested the First Lady to sing it. And I said, would you sing that maybe for New Year's Eve service or something? I just know that if you sung it, you would kill it. And she said to me, I have to ask my husband if I can do that. And I was like, say what now? Wait a minute, you the First Lady, and you have to ask your husband if you can sing a song? I said, okay, well, if that's what you got to do, honey, that's what you got to do. And I just started noticing different things. So during that time period, my mom had started to get sick. She was in the early stages of her illness, and I was spending a lot of time in my hometown. By now, my father has passed away, and I was spending a lot of time in my hometown with my mom. So I wasn't at church a lot. So when I did come back, I didn't see the First Lady. Pastor was there. Kids was there. No First Lady. So I thought maybe she was on vacation. Went the next month, because I was only going like maybe a couple of times a month because I was spending a lot of time with my mom. A couple of times a month I go to church. Went the second time. No First Lady. Kids was there. Pastor was there. No First Lady. Went back a third time the next month. Still no First Lady. So at this time I'm like, something is crazy. So one of my friends who I work with also went to the church, and I know he was a member. So I asked him at work, I said, what happened to the First Lady? He said, she left him. She left him and the kids. I was like, wait a minute. This black woman left her kids? And he was like, yeah. So I thought that was strange because, I know it happens, but it's rare that they leave the kids and the husband. Usually they take the kids with them. So I don't know what happened, but she was gone. And then I just knew that it was his fault. So another friend of mine, I was talking to her at work, and she didn't go to that church, but she knew him and his wife. And we were talking about it, and she said, well, he was stepping out. And I was like, how do you know? Well, she worked at a bank. And in some grocery stores, they have banks in the grocery stores. And in the grocery stores in Virginia, you can buy alcohol. You can buy wine and beer in the grocery stores in Virginia. I know a lot of places you can't do that, but in Virginia, you can. And in some grocery stores in Virginia, they have small banks. So she worked for the bank, and she told me, she said, girl, just about every Friday night, that pastor would go into the grocery store and get his bottle of wine and his box of condoms. Or at least get the box of condoms once a month and go on about his business. So here we are again. I'm at another church where the pastor is stepping out on his wife. And I was like, this has got to be the craziest thing. I have never in my life seen so many unfaithful black pastors in my life. How do you preach Christianity? How do you counsel married couples when you're not being faithful to your marriage? So I didn't leave immediately because I wasn't there that much. And it wasn't announced. So I was going on hearsay. So I stayed. I think the thing that drove me away from this particular church was, one thing was he invited Jesse Duplantis to come to Bible study. Now, I think Jesse Duplantis' church is in the South. I don't know if it's New Orleans or South Carolina, but it's one of those southern states. He would have had to have flown Jesse Duplantis to Virginia to come to our Bible study. And Jesse Duplantis ain't cheap. You ain't going to get him for $200. You're not. So it means you took the church's money to bring this man to tell us that we need to tithe more. Somebody make it make sense, because the math won't math. Even back then, before that was a saying, the math was not mathing. So that kind of got me upset. I was like, oh, this is more BS, more BS, more BS. So I still kind of stayed. And then I realized that he really doesn't care about his congregation. I did a show, and the show that I did was one I created, and it was called The Journey of Gospel Music. And I came out and I would tell stories about the journey that gospel music had taken from slavery through the civil rights movement, through Jim Crow, and how gospel music played a part in all of that for Black people, and then the different songs that were sung during that time period. And I needed a choir to back me up. And so I chose the choir of the church that I was attending. They paid me, and they paid me well. Now, a decolonized mind, even as a secular Christian, I should have known better. I should have tithed that amount and gave them 10%. But I was still in the cult of Christianity, and I donated everything that they had given me for the performance to the church. I didn't get a thank you, this is a nice donation. I got bupkis. So as time is going on, my employment had ended, and I was unemployed for almost 2 years. And in that 2 years, I couldn't pay my mortgage. And they were about to foreclose on my townhouse. And they actually did. And I remember reaching out to this pastor and telling him that they were about to foreclose on my home. And he says to me, "We'll pray for you." And I said, okay. So my home got foreclosed on, and I ended up having to leave my house. Now, I didn't know then what I know now, but I was told that after I had moved, somebody told me that, when they foreclose on your house, you don't have to move right away. It's not like a repo of your car, and I've had that done too. But they were telling me that when they foreclose on your house, you don't have to move immediately, that sometimes people live in the houses up to 6 months to a year before they actually have to move out. But by then I had already moved, so I didn't know that. I wish I had known that then. I'd have stayed there a little longer. So I moved to an apartment, and again, I have no church. And by this time, I didn't really want one. I did not want to keep going to churches and trying to find God. And so I'm going to let God find me, because I'm really tired of looking for him. From what I understand, that people go to prison, and that's where they find God and Allah. But I didn't want to go to prison to find him. So I was like, I'm just going to, stop going to the buildings, and maybe God will find me. I don't know. So I stopped going to church completely. I stopped listening to gospel music. I did start reading the Bible, which is one of the things that I hadn't done. Excuse me, I was doing everything else, just wasn't reading the Bible. And when I started reading the Bible, I was reading some stuff that made absolutely no sense to me. It was very, very hypocritical of what I was seeing in the churches and what the Bible was saying. So I was like, this is crazy. No wonder they don't preach the whole Bible in the church. People would get up and run out. Now, I was still a Christian. I was still, believing in Jesus. And I was also reading some other books, some other religious books. And I was reading information. I remember running across information that Jesus wasn't his real name, that his name was actually Yeshua, because the J alphabet had not been created at the time that he lived. And I'm so hungry for trying to make this has to be real. This book has to be true. It has to be real, that I kept thinking to myself, well, that's why my prayers aren't being answered. That's why I can't find them, because I'm calling the wrong name. I should be praying to Yeshua and not Jesus. And that's why Black folks can't get ahead, because we're praying to Jesus and not Yeshua. And I was really, really thinking, oh, I found it. Eureka, I have found the answer to my problems. I am good. And so I started calling him Yeshua. And things didn't change for me at all. Still didn't go back to church. I would go on Sunday mornings and sit by water. I would find a park near some water. And I would just sit. Sometimes for like 30, 45 to an hour, I would just sit. And I did that for like maybe 5 months. My mom was still sick, but her illness had not gotten that bad, and she was still able to take care of herself. And so I wasn't spending a lot of times. I was still visiting her almost every weekend. But during the week, I was working and doing my thing. But on Sundays, I would sit by the water unless I went to visit her, and I would take her to church. But yeah, I was not about to do the church thing. But I was lonely. I was very, very lonely. Remember, I said that if you belong to a church, you should never be lonely, because the church always got something going on that you can attend. And I was extremely, extremely, extremely lonely. I had no friends. My family had their own thing. So I thought to myself, well, I'll volunteer. I'll find some place to volunteer, and I'll go and meet some new people and make some friends, and it'll be all right. So I had gone online to look for places to volunteer in the city where I live. Come to find out that following weekend, I think I was looking like on a Tuesday or Wednesday. So the following weekend, I'll be looking online. They were having a community day in the city. And they were having all three of the Abrahamic faiths to come together and do community work. So the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims were all coming together. And they were going to be working in the community, whether it was making lunches for police officers, for firefighters, for going to senior homes and sitting and just talking with the seniors, for going to elders' houses and going to get grocery for them, or cutting their grass, what have you. They were doing all this. I was like, okay, that sounds good. I can volunteer to do that. Excuse me. I can volunteer to do that. So the places that were listed, the churches, the mosque, and the synagogue that were listed, the church was listed first. I said, okay, I'll call this church and see what I need to do, how I need to volunteer. I called the church. The lady answered the phone, and I kid you not, hello. And I said, is this da-da-da-da-da-da? She said, yes. I said, I understand that you have a community day coming up on this weekend, and I would like to volunteer. Did you go online and register? No, ma'am. I didn't go online and register. I just saw it online. If I need to, I can do that. But I was just calling to see, where you could use me. Well, did you order a T-shirt? Swear to God. I said, no, I didn't order a T-shirt, nor did I register. Well, ma'am, you have to register in order for you to come in and do the volunteer work. I said, okay, well, God bless, and hung up. And I thought, how rude. So the next on the list was the synagogue. Excuse me, this smoke has really gotten in my lungs, gotten in my throat. The next place was the synagogue. I called. The rabbi answered the phone. I said, I understand that you're doing some volunteer community work this Saturday, and I would like to volunteer. He said, okay, great. I said, sir, I didn't register online. He said, okay. I said, I haven't ordered a T-shirt. He said, okay. I said, do I need to do those things before I can volunteer? He said, no, just show up. We'll find something for you to do. I said, thank you. So that following Saturday, I went to the synagogue. I was the only raisin in the rice. And what they were doing for the community, they were making backpacks for foster kids. And so we were stuffing the backpacks with necessities that kids that live in foster homes or have to leave a foster home will have something to take with them. And so we made about 100 backpacks, and it was cool. Again, I'm the only raisin in the rice. And they were so nice to me. So nice. They didn't proselytize and say, ooh, you should become a Jew. They did invite me to their services, to their Shabbat services. And I said, okay. I'd never been to one before. I thought it'd be interesting. So the following Friday night is when they had their Shabbat services. I go. They have doorkeepers. They had 2 gentlemen at the door that was giving out programs. And the last time I saw a church program was at my home church in South Hill, Virginia, at Diamond Grove RZUA Church, where every Sunday that we had church, we had a program of the order of service. And so they gave me a program for the order of service. I said, well, this is amazing. I go in and I sit down and I sit with one of the guys who was there the Saturday before that was just, talking to me about Judaism or whatever. And the service starts and they start singing, and they're singing in Hebrew, and I don't know what they're singing. But I think it's cool. I'm like, okay, no choir. The only musician they have is a woman playing the organ. And I'm like, okay. So then they had testimonial time. That ain't what they called it, but that's what they had. And testimonial time is when you testify on some wonderful things that have happened to you on this past week. It could be anything. To my granddaughter went to the prom. My son and his wife are moving to California. My nephew got a new job. My daughter is playing soccer tomorrow. It could be the least thing. And they are testifying on great news. Basically, they were sharing good news. Now, the term sharing good news is a New Testament thing. It ain't a Torah or an Old Testament thing. That's a New Testament thing. But they were sharing good news. And I was like, they're doing testimony. Second thing that they had, or third thing that they had that I noticed, they had a sick and shut-in list. The last time I saw a sick and shut-in list was at my home church in South Hill, Virginia. Ain't never seen one at none of these mega churches that I had been a part of. Not a program and not a sick and shut-in list. You didn't know who was sick and who was shut in at those churches. But at this small synagogue, and it was small, it was only about maybe 40 members that actually came to the services. There were probably more than that were members of the synagogue, but I guess they were kind of like CMEs for Christians, Christmas, Mother's Day, and Easter, but of course not those particular holidays. But they had a sick and shut-in list. And you would read it and you would see who was on it. And then if there's someone's name who wasn't on it, you'd raise your hand and you'd say their name so that the synagogue would know to pray for them. I said, well, what? Okay. I was feeling really, really good. Again, they didn't have a choir. And then there was a part in the service where they would venerate their ancestors. They would say a prayer, and preceding the prayer, they would call out the names of Abraham and Sarah, and Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Rachel and Leah. Now, they didn't call out the concubines, just the wives. But they would call out, okay. After service, they had what we in the Christian community would call communion, but that's not what they called it. They would have bread and wine, but they had real bread. They call it challah. They had real bread and they had real wine. And the wine that we had at the synagogue was Manischewitz. And after they did the prayer for the bread and the wine, they always had like not food, but they would have like desserts. People would bring brownies and cakes and cookies and pies, and you would stand around and you would fellowship after the service. And it was so reminiscent of my small church that I grew up in. And I felt a kinship to them. Everybody, the kids went to school together. It was just, I felt at home. And so I went that first time, that Friday night, and it was 5 years later that I left. So for 5 years, I was at a synagogue. I learned the songs. I still didn't know how to read Hebrew, but I could read the songs because repetition each Friday night. And I went every Friday night. There was weren't many times that I didn't go to the services. And when I started going to the synagogue, every one of my friends, of my Christian friends, stopped talking to me. Every one of them. All the ones that I had gone to church with, that I had known for 10, 15 years, they stopped talking to me. And I hadn't decided that I was going to convert. I was just going to the synagogue. And they all stopped talking to me. And I thought that was the craziest thing. And as I'm learning more and more about Judaism, I'm learning more and more about the parts of Christianity that I didn't really know. And I kind of knew Jesus was Jewish, but it's not something that they talk about in the church. They want to make him a Christian, but he wasn't a Christian. He was Jewish. And so when they turned their backs on me, I'm like, well, if I'm going to the synagogue, that would have been the place that Jesus would have worshiped. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I'm closer to Jesus than you are. So the next time you want to quote your little wristband, what would Jesus do? He'd go to a synagogue. So that bull crap about upon this rock, he'll build his church. He wasn't building churches. He would have built synagogues, not churches. So that bullshit, New Testament bullshit, because that's what it is, where they have just taken the Jewish information and the Jewish history and just transformed it into something else. Yeah. But they all stopped talking to me. It didn't matter what I was going through. They didn't talk to me. And they still don't. Not to this day. So I'm at the synagogue, and again, I'm the only raisin in the rice. There were some biracial children that were there, and there were a couple of black members that came to the high holy days. And but again, most of the time it was just me. They celebrated Black History Month. They honored Black History Month. And they weren't doing it just because I was there, because the programs that they had were older programs. They were like 10 years old. So it was something that they'd always done. I don't even know of any church that I have attended that honored Black History Month. But the synagogue did. It was a Reform synagogue. And so after 2-3 years there, I decided I wanted to convert. I want to be Jewish because I'm thinking that that's what my ancestry is. I'm like, okay, so the Old Testament is older than the New Testament. And in the Old Testament, or the Torah and the Tanakh, Africa is mentioned a lot. So maybe we're Jewish and not Christians. We had to be Jewish first, then Christians. That was my logic, because I'm searching, y'all. I'm trying to find something to connect with, some spiritual thing to connect with. So I'm like, okay, so maybe I'm supposed to be Jewish. So I started even using the Jewish lingo. You know, I was looking at everybody that was famous, that was Black and Jewish. I was like, ooh, Sammy Davis Jr., he was Black and Jewish. Ooh, Nell Carter, she was Black and Jewish. And I was like, oh, wow, this is really, really cool. And again, no friends, except for my white Jewish friends. That's what I had. So we had changed rabbis. We had a male rabbi at first, and then we had another rabbi that came in, and it was a female rabbi. And both of them really, really cool. The first rabbi, he passed away in 2017. He passed away in 2017. And then the new rabbi came in. Cool. I'm still friends with her. I'm still friends with some of the people at the synagogue. People at the church, not so much. But I'm ready to convert. I'm studying. I'm going to classes. I'm trying to learn Hebrew. So yeah, I'm ready to convert. I'm ready. Now, outside of my spiritual life, my work life, I had changed jobs 11 times. My mother was getting sicker, a lot sicker. She was diagnosed with a very rare disease, and it got to the point where she could not stay by herself anymore. And my sister, my oldest sister, was also sick. She had heart troubles. And so us as a family are now dealing with our mother's illness and our sister's illness. And so we ended up having to move my mom from her home to a facility close by her children, us, me and my siblings. And I added my mom's name and my sister's name to the sick and the shut-in list. And they always prayed. They always asked how they were doing. Again, my Christian friends, not so much. So, I'm studying, and I'm ready to convert. My sister got extremely, extremely sick, and she ended up transitioning and joining the Ancestors in 2017. And 6 months later, we lost our mom in the early part of 2018. but I'm still at the synagogue. But I'm only going now maybe once a month because by this time, me and my mom have moved into an apartment together. We took her out of the facilities, moved into an apartment. I stayed with her. I was her primary caregiver. We had nurses to come in, and my brothers and sisters would come in, and we would rotate through. But I was the one that actually lived with her. And so I'm going to the synagogue maybe once a month. I would have a nurse to come in just so I could have some type of spiritual connection. So remember I told you that there's part of the service where they would venerate their ancestors, and they would call upon or they would honor Abraham and Sarah and so forth and so on. And I remember this this one Friday night. And let me back up. So in my personal life, in my job, I had become a storyteller, a historical interpreter. And in order to do that, I have to read and really, really research the ancestors in order to be able to tell their stories. And as I'm reading and researching them, I'm finding out that they weren't Christians, that was something that was forced on them, and that my ancestors weren't Jewish, that wasn't forced on them, but that's not what they were, that they had a spiritual system that came from Africa. And a lot of them held on to that. And so I'm getting closer and closer to my ancestors and away from the religious aspects of things. So on Friday night, when they would venerate their ancestors, and I didn't know that was the term back then, but I'm using it now so that I can explain what they were doing. When they were venerating their ancestors, that was on one Friday night, and we're saying this prayer, and they say something prior to saying the name of their ancestor, of their spiritual ancestors. And it would be akin to in African spirituality, if you were venerating an ancestor, you would say Ibase. And it was something that they would say. And then they would say the ancestor's name and they would bow. And one Friday night, we were doing that prayer. And I heard my ancestors. And I think this is probably the first time that I heard them outside of me actually doing a presentation or performance. And they said, "Sit down. Those are not your ancestors." And I sat down. And I thought, well, maybe I can, when they're doing this prayer, I'll say my spiritual ancestors. When they say Abraham, I'll say Dr. King. When they say Sarah, I'll say Harriet Tubman. And so I tried that the next time I went. And my ancestors said, "No, you can't honor us with someone else's faith." And I sat down. And I was so confused because I didn't know where to go. I was doing these presentations and these performances, and I could feel the spirit of the ancestors, and they were opening doors for me and opportunities that I thought was coming from, from Yahweh or whatever, from the biblical God. And my life was just changing so fast. So then my mother transitioned. She joined the ancestors. And when she transitioned, I didn't, at the time that she passed, I didn't have time to mourn at that time because I knew that we had to come together and give her a proper, do the funeral and all of that. And so I really didn't have time to mourn. And so afterwards, when the family had all left and I was in the apartment by myself, that was when I could actually cry and think about her. And I remember that when my father had passed away, 2 days after he transitioned, I dreamed about him. And he came to me in a dream and told me that he was okay. When my sister had passed away 6 months prior to my mother passing away, whenever we would talk about her, the lights would flash. So I knew it was my sister letting us know she was okay. So my mother transitioned. I hadn't heard anything. No dreams about her. Nothing. And I remember saying something about it on social media. And a friend of mine introduced me through social media to a friend of hers who was a spiritualist. And she sent me a message and she said, set up an altar for your mother. She said, normally you wouldn't do it this quickly, but you need to hear from her. All you need is a white cloth, a candle, a glass of water, either your mother's picture or just her name written down. She said, don't put any pictures of anybody living on the altar. Right now, you just want to hear from your mother, so just do it for her. And so I did. She said, put incense on the altar. If you have a plant, put that by the altar. But just so you have all of the elements. I said, okay. So I did. And I would sit at the altar and I would talk to my mom. And probably a week later, I saw a hummingbird. And my mother's disease was intertwined with the hummingbird, and I'll explain that in another podcast. And I was going to work to do a storytelling performance. And I got to my car, and there was a ladybug on my windshield. And I used to call my mother Ladybug. And when I got to the building where I was working, I heard the cleaning crew talking outside of the theater. And one of them said, is Margaret coming today? And that was my mother's name. Or that is my mother's name. And I realized she was telling me she's okay. And had I just stayed in Christianity, stayed in Judaism, and not yielded to the spirit of the ancestors, I don't think I would have heard from her. Because my mind was so colonized and I was looking for Jesus. And so after that encounter with spirit, and by the way, when my mother passed away, not one of those Christian mofos sent me a card. I didn't get a text. I didn't get a telephone call. I didn't get anything. A couple of people from the synagogue came to my mother's services, and they're not even supposed to look at dead bodies. They came to the services, and my mother's service was in our hometown, and so it was like a 2-hour drive for them. And a couple of them came to the service, and not one of my Christian friends did anything, said anything. But yeah, so that was the last time that I have gone to a religious organization other than for a funeral or a wedding or to present, to do a performance. But for a regular service, you'll never, ever get me at a church of today. If there is a spiritualist church, I may go to that. Maybe I forgot what it's called. I think it's Unity churches. They kind of are like a melting pot when it comes to religion. They have everything in there: Buddhists, Jews, Muslims, Christians. So, but nope. And so my path began of going back to the ways of my ancestors and reading what they practice while on the plantation, what they practiced prior to coming here from Africa, what they practiced while they were here before the colonizers came. And as I'm reading these things, I'm starting to understand that I've been practicing these things all of my life and never had a name for it. It was just how we lived. I thought all Black people believed outside of church what we believed down in the country, I guess they would say. But yeah. And I didn't realize I didn't have a name for it. They didn't have a name for it. They just called it living. And it would be maybe a year of me just reading and studying and trying to find my place before I realized that I've been practicing what is called hoodoo, not voodoo, but hoodoo. And that I had finally got my certificate of divorce from Jesus. And when I tell you I have a peace that surpasses all understanding, because I don't get it. I don't understand how my ancestors do what they do for me. I don't understand a lot how spirit works. I just know that it does. And I don't have to worry about the man in the sky that sits high and looks low and can see every single solitary thing that I do wrong and chastise me for it. But let people who do real wrong stuff get away with it. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I have a peace that surpasses all understanding. All right, so we are a little over an hour. That is my journey from Christianity to Judaism to coming to African spirituality to hoodoo and understanding that I've been practicing it all along. And so the next episodes will just I'll just talk about how I've been practicing it and how you, if you are Black, you practice hoodoo. You might not think you do, but you do. You practice hoodoo. And I'm going to be breaking down just how you do that. I'm also going to be doing some stories viewed from the pew. Still some crazy things that I encountered while in the church. But mainly just trying to help some people who are trying to leave Western religion and to find their path and find their way home to our ancient ancestors. And you'll see that your most recent ancestors, like your parents, your grandparents, they practiced those African spiritual systems again and didn't know it. And when I start to tell you how the Black church is so full of African spirituality, it is ridiculous. Black people, they want to deny it. They want to say, I don't know, that African. No, Egypt is the land of heathens in Africa. No, Africa's this, Africa's that. Woo, when I break it down for you, how y'all are not only practicing hoodoo, but you talking to the dead, you venerating your ancestors, You're honoring your ancestors. You're worshiping your ancestors. And I'm going to break it all down to you and tell you exactly how you are doing this very thing every day. So until next time, may the ancestors watch between me and thee while absent one from another. May the divine mother and father, source of energy, rest, rule, and abide within each and every one of you. When you look to find God, may you look within yourself first. And know that every time you are looking in the mirror, you are looking at God. Have a good day, have a good morning, have a good afternoon, have a good evening, whenever you are listening to this podcast. I will talk to you soon. Love, peace, and hair grease.